Welcome to the College of Complexes. I'm standing in for Tom Berry tonight. He's forsaken his railroad experience for a sailing experience. He's sailing from Boston up the St. Lawrence River to Quebec City and Montreal, which is pretty nice, and flying back. So he can't be here, obviously, so I'm standing in, doing my best. So anyway, I crave your indulgences for any mistakes I'm going to make, which is inevitable. Anyway, so this is meeting number 477 of the Dallas College of Complexes. The College of Complexes started in Chicago in the early 1950s, apparently to solve all the world's problems. Obviously, they didn't succeed, so Tom gave up and came to Dallas, and with a gentleman called Jim Peeler, founded the College of Complex in Dallas here. As you can see, we meet every Saturday. We put on a program of diverse content, which we are here to amuse and entertain and cause arguments to happen. But anyway, so the format of the meeting is, firstly, there are announcements. Secondly, after that, then the speaker makes his presentation. It lasts usually an hour, although it can run over a little bit if he wants. Then after that, there are questions, which hopefully the speaker will be able to answer. Then after that, there is roughly 5 minutes for the so-called rebuttals, or comments on the speaker's speech. And finally, the speaker can get up and wrap up the meeting and deny all knowledge of anything. Anyway, thank you very much. So tonight we're welcoming Hexel Colorado here, representing the Yang Gang, and he's here to speak about automation is here now, and and also because of that, the fact that it will displace workers, no doubt, it is time for universal basic income, which apparently Andrew Yang is promoting. In fact, I was in Finland a few weeks ago, and that's a country that's actually tried this out. I can't report on the results yet, but at least it's being tried somewhere. And of course, apparently Finland is the happiest country, which is, I detected some happiness when I was there. I drank lots of coffee and pull of bread, so it was quite nice, quite nice. Anyway, without much ado, I welcome Hexel to the podium here, and good luck.
Well, good evening, Dallas College of Complexes. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As John said, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm glad you went to Finland, because that really bolsters my presentation today. So my name is, as he said, is Hexel Colorado. I'm the regional organizer for the DFW Yang Gang. If you guys don't know what the Yang Gang is, we are the grassroots movement in support of Andrew Yang for president in 2020. He is yeah, you can clap for that, that's all right. So Andrew Yang is running as a Democrat for presidency. He is in a crowded field, but he is gaining large momentum. When I was here last time, the speaker was saying that what he was mainly looking for in a candidate was someone who can rally a movement. And I believe that movement is here, and it is called the Yang Gang. Am I right? Yeah. As you can see, I brought my crowd. So tonight I'm going to make the case for Andrew Yang. I'm going to make the case that automation is here, and the time for universal basic income is now. About the Yang Gang, we've started here in Dallas since April. We've had a number of events. In fact, we have our own social every Saturday, so it complements yours. It's every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. We have a coffee social at La La Land Kind Cafe, which is just down the street. In addition to the coffee social, we have events in Denton. We have a weekly meetup in Denton, in Plano, in Fort Worth, and in UTD. So we've started expanding to college campuses as well. So this is not our first college to speak about this topic. And the reason that we have started this movement is because we're very passionate about the future. If you've heard anything about Andrew Yang, you know that there is an Asian man running for president who wants to provide $1,000 a month to every American citizen above the age of 18. Well, guess what? It's true! But this is not a gimmick. Universal basic income has been advocated for by Martin Luther King. Thomas Paine wrote about it at the founding of the country. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists wrote a paper saying this would be great for our country. They demanded it, and in the 70s it almost became law. It passed the House twice. In fact, Alaska has had a basic income for the last 40 years. This is not a left issue or a right issue. This is a forward issue. And this is evidenced by the fact that it's been tried around the world. 35 different cities, countries, and states have tried it. Over 100 different papers have been researching this topic. And what we found is that it'll create over 2 million new jobs. It'll increase GDP by $4 trillion. It'll lift millions of families out of poverty, and it'll prepare this country for the fourth industrial revolution over the next 12 years. By 2030, experts estimate that a third of all jobs will be automated away. The Obama White House predicts that 83% of jobs bringing in less than $20 an hour are subject to automation. And so this is not something that's coming, this is happening right now. If you look around in your communities, you see 7,000 stores have closed just this year alone to date. The year's not even over yet. So by the time the year is over, tens of thousands of stores will close, and that number will increase year after year after year. And if we don't do something about it now, then there's no predicting what will happen. Even if we get Donald Trump unelected this election, we need to solve the problems that got him elected in the first place. Otherwise, the next election and the election after that, someone else will come in and replace him. And so that's why we have to solve these challenges now, and that's why Andrew Yang is running for president. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to try to get some jokes in there. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to talk about who Andrew Yang is, where did he come from, what are the problems that we're facing as a country, what are his solutions, including the Freedom Dividend, and what are the other solutions that he's proposing, like Medicare for All and human-centered capitalism, aka the American Scorecard. We're going to talk about common questions, common counters to the facts that we're presenting. And finally, we're going to end it all with laying out the ultimate vision for what we see for this country. An ultimate vision for putting humans before dollars, for putting humanity first. And it's a vision that makes sure that everybody has an equal voice in our democracy. So, let's get started. Andrew Yang is of Taiwanese descent, but he was born in upstate New York. His parents immigrated from Taiwan, and they met while both his parents were studying at Columbia. His father worked for IBM and General Electric, having patented over 60 different patents in his time here in the United States. Andrew Yang himself grew up in New York and went to school in New Hampshire. He went to Phillips Exeter Academy, and after that he went on to graduate from Brown with a degree in economics and political science. After that he went to study at Columbia Law School, and where he got his law degree. After he graduated from law school, he got his first job, or first post-grad job, as a corporate lawyer, and he worked there as a corporate lawyer for 6 months and then quit because he hated it. He realized that this line of work was not for him, and he got a peek into what the Ivy League life was like, and he wanted to do something different. So he started his first company. It was called Star Giving. He started in 1999. It was an online website that connected celebrities with charities. And it was started in 1999, and in 2000 it went bust because, as you may remember, that time was the dot-com bubble burst, and he had his minimal rise and maximum fall. And so he often jokes that during that time when his business was not working, his parents said, "Oh, our son Andrew, yeah, he's a lawyer. He's not an entrepreneur, he's still a lawyer." So after that didn't work out, his entrepreneurship bug still stayed with him. And so he worked at a startup in the healthcare industry. So he worked in the healthcare industry for a number of years. And then he started working at a company called Manhattan Prep. And Manhattan Prep became one of the largest testing and the college testing and prep companies in the nation. And got bought by Washington Post and Kaplan for multi-millions of dollars. After that success with Manhattan Prep and working in the education sector, he took his experience to the next level and started a nonprofit called Venture for America. Venture for America is a company is a nonprofit that started over 800 businesses around the country in developing cities like Baltimore, St. Louis, Detroit. And these are cities that needed the support. And because of his successful work starting hundreds of businesses and creating tens of thousands of jobs, he was recognized twice by the Obama White House. In 2012, he was awarded the Champion of Change Award, and in 2015, he was awarded again with the Ambassador of Entrepreneurship, both under the Obama White House. And so as he was getting success, he was getting medals and recognition for creating jobs. But because he had experience starting a business and failing, and then trying it again and again, and then succeeding. And so he spread that information and spread that knowledge to everyone around him, took action. But what he realized was, as much as he was getting awarded for creating jobs, it was like trying to get water out of a bathtub with a hole in it. Because, sorry, that's a bad analogy. It's trying to get water out of a sinking boat, not a bathtub. It's trying to get water out of a boat that's sinking. Because as much as he was creating thousands of jobs, he looked around and saw that millions of jobs were being destroyed by automation, by globalization, and something needed to be done about it. And so he went to Washington and said, hey, he wrote a book called The War on Normal People. And in that book, he lays out what he's found going on around the country, which is jobs are being replaced, and the people who are marginalized by automation. We've lost 4 million jobs to automation, specifically to automation. Whenever I talk about this, they say, oh, that's globalization. There's a lot of other factors. Specifically, directly due to warehouses and large manufacturers replacing people with machines. And those 4 million jobs were in Rust Belt counties and states that did not see those jobs come back. And those are the same places that we saw rising drug overdoses and drug addiction, rising people getting on disability for various reasons. And those are the same people who voted for Obama when they voted for change in 2008 and 2012. And those are the same people who, despite voting for Obama for 2 terms, they voted for Trump in 2016. And he presented that as the strongest correlation that you can find. Now, when you look at the data, there's a lot of reasons that people credit Trump with winning, especially those formerly blue states. They say FBI. If you go and turn to cable news, they'll say FBI, they'll say emails, they'll say racism. But those answers don't cut down to the core of why they flipped. It's hard to make the case that someone who voted for Obama in 2008 would vote for Trump in 2016 because of racism. Kind of hard to make that case. But what happened was Trump, although his solutions were wrong, he touched on a real pain. Because in the 2016 election, what was his message? Make America great again. And it wasn't a Democratic response. America is already great. And so that did not ring with those voters, and that's why they flipped. So he took this information about what's happening to our country to DC, to Capitol Hill, and said, hey guys, what are we going to do about this? And the response he got was, Andrew, no one's paying attention to that. No one cares about that. If you want to see change, you have to bring it come crashing down on us. You have to make a movement so large that we can't ignore it. Because here in Capitol Hill, we're not leaders, we're followers. We're followers of public sentiment. And so he said, you know what? If no one else is going to get it done, I'll be the one to step up and make it happen. And that's why he's running for president in 2020. So that was the vision that he found. So what's going on in this country? What's going on in this country is that automation is sweeping the nation. We're entering what experts call the 4th industrial revolution. And what's happening is, like I mentioned, 4 million manufacturing jobs. A third of all jobs are going to be gone by 2030. And these jobs are going to be fundamentally replaced by something else. Now, one feedback I get often is, well, we've been through technological shifts before. This is the 4th industrial revolution. We've had a 3rd one. And a lot of people point to that as an example of how we got through it. Well, if this is going to be anything like the last industrial revolution, if you remember, it wasn't an easy transition. There was riots, there was people. The word sabotage is a French word that literally comes from putting a shoe in a machine to break it. And the word sabotage literally comes from people rioting and destroying machines to protect their jobs. And because of the third industrial revolution and the riots and the labor movement, that's why we have Labor Day, that's why we have the 40-hour work week, that's why we have public schools. And so we are entering that same age today, and we're seeing it in the world around us. And some of the solutions that are imposed by politicians simply don't work. A lot of politicians say, well, we need to retrain for the jobs of the future. We need to re-educate and retrain. And that's a great sentiment, except the problem is government retraining programs have a 0 to 10% effectiveness rating. Because if you take a 50-year-old truck driver, what's the chances that they're going to enjoy going back to school or compete with a 21-year-old going through the exact same track as they are? And so where's automation going to hit us? There's 5 main sectors that make up the economy today. Most jobs fall into one of 5 categories: administrative and clerical, retail work, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. Administrative and clerical, who here has ever called tech support or customer support on the phone before? All right, keep your hand up again if you enjoy it. Okay, one person is very friendly, really enjoys talking to technical support or customer support. Well, if you've ever talked to customer support, there's usually one of 2 reasons. One is because it's a person who's very difficult to get through, or because it's a machine. But when we go to conferences of major CEOs and companies, and ask them, how many of you guys are thinking about replacing your customer support or call centers with call software? And every entrepreneur and every CEO raised their hand. And it's getting to the point where if the technology is getting so good that instead of sounding like a robot that's really difficult to talk to, it's going to become to the point where talking to customer support is a robot saying, "Hi Hexel, how are you? Nice to meet you, how can I help you?" In just a few years, it'll become indiscernible between a human and a robot. Will it still be irritating? Possibly. It might still be irritating, but at least at some point it's going to come that it's irritating with a robot instead of with a call center. In just the last few years, thousands of call center jobs have been lost, and a lot of these tasks are being automated away. Same with the next sector is retail work. Who here has observed stores closing in their communities? Who remembers shopping at Payless Shoes for shoes for their kids? That's going away. Who's observed JCPenney's and Sears going out of business? And while you might not think of that directly as automation because you don't see robots shopping for you, like picking the cereal from the top shelf and putting it in a shopping cart, that's automation because what singular company is responsible for killing all these brick and mortar stores? Amazon. And if you go to an Amazon warehouse, do you see miles and miles of people or miles and miles of robots?
Robots.
And so this is an example of just because you don't see the robots marching down the street, they are indeed taking the jobs. And who's seen news about the drones that Amazon has got approval for to make deliveries to your door? Who saw the recent Boston Dynamics robot that has an arm? It looks very cute. It's a little dog. Have you seen that? It's a little dog that can walk and can navigate different terrain. If you kick it, it'll still stay upright. And it has an arm that can carry a load on its back. And so very quickly you're going to see a lot of jobs, that very menial, very rote jobs go away. I'm going to go to the next one, food service and food prep. I probably shouldn't say this one in a restaurant because it might cause panic. But those jobs, as you can imagine, if you go to Vegas, they've already started replacing bartenders with machines. Fast food service. Okay, I don't know if this is the crowd to eat McDonald's, but who eats McDonald's here? Okay, the young people I brought. Okay, awesome. So if you go to a McDonald's today, if you go to any fast food, you see that instead of talking to a person to place your order, you see a machine. Just like as you have self-checkout at the grocery, you also have self-checkout in the fast food. And McDonald's just spent tens of millions of dollars to acquire a drive-through AI technology, where you still drive up, you still ask for your order, and it still works the exact same way as before, but it's a machine instead of a person. And retail and fast food is responsible for millions of jobs. Most of those jobs are held by middle-aged mothers. Women are going to have to bear the brunt of that particular sector being automated away. Trucking, driving, and transportation. Who here checked their mail this morning? Who here lives in Dallas? Who here lives in Dallas and owns a mailbox? I know that's a weird question. If you live in Dallas and you own a mailbox, there is a good chance that that mail was at one point on a self-driven truck. Because USPS has already started using self-driving trucks to deliver mail from Phoenix to here. And so the trucking is the #1 job in 29 states. It's responsible for 3 million jobs directly, but it's also responsible for 10 million jobs when you consider all of those little towns, those microeconomies, that people rely on truck drivers to stop, get gas, get food. Manufacturing. I probably don't have to go to that because it's tied to everything else. But the key thing about manufacturing is that those jobs, when they left, they didn't go away. They didn't come back. What happened to all those people who lost their manufacturing jobs, the average of whom is a 40 to 50-year-old male who was high school educated and has no college degree? They went on disability, they just stayed unemployed. Opioid addiction, we're facing this opioid addiction crisis right now. And most people, when they talk about that crisis, they focus on the facetious side of it. But no one ever thinks about what's the underlying social economic factors that drives people to do that. In fact, drug overdoses have become the #1 killer in the United States. It hasn't always been that way. What's driving that increase? If you look at the data, it's directly tied to job loss and job displacement. So, I just gave a very bleak picture of the country, but wait, there's more. There's even more bad news. So, really great dinner conversation. So, that's automation. So you say, okay, well that's coming. Surely we have some runway, right? Well, even whether or not you agree that automation is here, which it is, if you look around, chances are when you guys walk to your car and drive home, you're going to drive past, you're going to walk past, you're going to walk over people living on the street, people with nothing to their name. There are 100,000 children who will experience homelessness at some point this year. 1 in 11 homeless people are veterans. And we'll get to this subject in a moment, but a lot of people say you don't need universal basic income because you have welfare. And there's this dichotomy that you have to choose. Well, you have to choose one or the other. It feels like you're putting people out. There are 13 million Americans living below the poverty line who have no connection to any form of social safety net or welfare. So, I have a lot more bad news, but that's all I'm going to talk about for now. So let's talk about some good news. So this is a very bleak picture. This is sounds pretty awful. And even though it might not seem like that right away or in our personal lives, it's happening and people are going to very soon wake up to the magnitude of this issue. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is the Freedom Dividend. Andrew Yang, when he realized that the White House and politicians are not going to do anything about it, he decided to run for president and propose the Freedom Dividend. The Freedom Dividend is simple. Every American citizen above the age of 18 gets $1,000 a month unconditionally. As long as you're a citizen, as long as you stay out of jail, that's something you have as a right as a shareholder of this country. And so, how does this work? Who pays for it? That's the first question. I'm going to take this question in 2 parts. But right off the bat, who knows how much Amazon paid in taxes last year? Zero. And what many people may not know is that Amazon was not the only one. 60 other multi-billion-dollar companies paid 0 in federal income taxes last year. And so what we're going to do to make sure that everyone can have a way to survive this revolution is join every other developed country and implement a value-added tax. A value-added tax is implemented by 97% of the world. And it'll take us, it's very hard for Amazon to weasel its way out of. And it'll take a tiny sliver of every Amazon sale, every Uber mile, every Google's paid search, and it gives it to the American people, and it'll generate over $800 billion every year. And so it'll generate over $800 billion a year, and that covers a large chunk of it. So the headline cost, if you guys can see the hat, it says math. That's one of our mottos. If you guys didn't know, MAP actually stands for something. It's an acronym. It stands for Make America Think Harder. Because we're not afraid to face the hard facts. So the hard facts are this. The headline cost of universal basic income is $3 trillion. Right out of the gate, you cover $300 billion of that through this value-added tax, which is the rest of the world already has. Andrew Yang is proposing a 10% value-added tax, which is far less than the median of the rest of the world. Most of Europe's on a 20% value-added. So we generate over $800 billion. And then the second part is the overlap with current welfare programs. Right now we have over 120 welfare programs, and like I said, they're not perfect. They leave a large chunk of the country uncovered. But because the Freedom Dividend is opt-in, and if you opt into the unconditional Freedom Dividend, you choose to forego your other welfare benefits, then that right there brings down the price tag by $1 trillion. And so now you quickly begin to see, oh, this is really easy to pay for. And so you bring down the price tag by $1 trillion, and then what comes next? The Freedom Dividend, economists have done studies. The Roosevelt Institute did a study that found that the Freedom Dividend would generate over another $300 billion, notes. It'll generate another $800 billion in new revenue because of the 4 trillion GDP that's going to increase our economy by. And so right away it starts to come down. And so when you think about the jobs that are created, the people are lifted off the streets. Because the other aspect to think about is we're already paying a chunk of this cost right now. But we're paying for it in the most destructive ways imaginable. We're paying for it after people are on the street, after people take themselves to jail. There was a security guard in New Hampshire that said we should pay people to stay out of jail because it costs the taxpayer more to incarcerate them. It costs us money to house them, to give them health care, to feed them. And so we're already paying for all of these things. We're paying it for it when the person who's given up on life decides to shoot up a public place or a school or for where a lot of people are. And studies have shown that these mass shootings cost the American taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars. So we're already paying for this. And so if we implement it, if we pay for it, what happens to us? Well, studies have found around the world that our mental health improves, graduation rates improve because people are able to stay in school, mothers spend more time with their children, incarceration rates go down, people are able to do things that they were not able to do before. And so all of the signs indicate that society overall improves, as well as prepares us for this impending economic shift. How many people, actually I was about to ask, I don't want to put the room on the spot, but if you were to guess, what percentage of the country is living paycheck to paycheck? Who knows the number to that?
40%.
40%? 50%? 80% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck. Half of the country cannot afford an unexpected paycheck. Do you think with that, despite the fact that we live in the richest country in the world, do you think with those numbers, we're going to be ready for a third of all jobs disappear? We're already just barely getting by now. So those are just some of the things that will happen under universal basic income. It's what we've seen in Finland, it's what we've seen in Canada, it's what we've seen here in the United States. Alaska's had a basic income for the last 40 years. And how do they pay for it?
Oil.
And what's the oil of the 21st century?
Technology.
So studies show that technology has actually become more valuable than oil. Who here remembers getting their data check in the mail?
Not me.
I didn't.
No.
But there are people around the world who are getting their around the country getting their oil check. So just as what Alaska did with oil, we're going to do the same thing with technology. So those are the highlights of what the basic income can do, how we're going to pay for it, and what's going to happen to us as a country for it. Now, Andrew Yang's not a one-trick pony. He has the Freedom Dividend and Universal Basic Income is just the first of 3 pillars. The second pillar is Medicare for All. We have to get health care off of the backs of employers And it doesn't make sense in the richest country in the world that people are unsure if they can get taken care of. In fact, it's so important that we consider it a second pillar because the Freedom Dividend almost needs Medicare for all to work. Because it's kind of moot if you have this $1,000 a month, but all of it's going towards a medical check. And so Medicare for all, making sure that everyone has a right to quality health care, is the second pillar of his platform. And the third pillar of his platform is something called human-centered capitalism, or the American scorecard. A lot of people say that in this, ideological war between capitalism and socialism, that capitalism has won, that that society has advanced because of it, and it's true in many regards. But unfortunately, we're living at a time when the only thing that matters is the almighty dollar. And companies, large corporations, are watching out not for people, but for the bottom line. And so, who here woke up this morning really excited about GDP? Anyone? I'm getting some silence, no's, and some sarcastic applause. Who here remembers when Donald Trump was running for president and he said that the unemployment number was fake? Who remembers that? Yeah, some of you guys remember the election saying the unemployment number was fake. Then what happened when he became president? Suddenly those exact same unemployment numbers were real. It's a miracle. And so what Donald Trump was tapping into and what we have come to realize is that our country is focusing on the wrong things. We largely measure the health of our country by GDP, but the problem with GDP, it was made over 100 years ago, and the inventor of GDP said, I made this number specifically so we can measure how well we're getting out of the depression, but do not use this as a permanent measure of the country's health. And what did we use? We use it as a permanent measure of the country's health. Of course. And so what the American scorecard is, it says, look, what we measure determines what we excel at. And this country has gotten really good at producing GDP. Unemployment's at a decade low. But that still doesn't explain the discrepancy of people living on the street and people struggling to find jobs who've exited the workplace and turned to drugs and other things to get by. And so the American scorecard says, look, instead of measuring our country and how well we're doing by GDP and unemployment, these outdated figures, let's measure our country by the things that matter, like graduation rates, incarceration rates, income inequality, how many families stay together, how many people are living on the streets. These are all figures that you can walk across once he's president in 2021. Thank you, Dallas. Once he's president in 2021, he can just walk across the street and get those numbers. And he has promised that, and we can guarantee this because it's not really that hard to do, but it takes someone with vision to do it. He will be the first president to use a PowerPoint in the State of the Union. And year after year, he will present those same standards. He will change what we measure as a standard for how well we're doing as a country. It might seem like a cheesy thing, but the truth is we excel at what we measure, right? And if we could have lashed our horse onto GDP over 100 years ago, imagine what this country will look like in another 100 years when we latch our horse to the things that matter. How well our kids are eating, how healthy their public school food is, how many of them are graduating. These are all things that we can decide as a country, and that's why it's important to choose who we vote for. Those are the three pillars of his campaign. On yang2020.com, you can find all of the policies. He has over 140 policies on his website now that cover things like climate change, lowering the cost of higher education, expanding access to education, gun safety reform, and a ton of others. I'll touch on one more thing, and then I'll come back to the second part of how we pay for it, because I think that's a good way to touch on the values that we believe in. One of my favorite policies beyond the Freedom Dividend is a concept called democracy dollars. If you guys don't know who Lawrence Lessig is, if you guys don't know who Equal Citizens are, there's an organization called Equal Citizens that ranks the different presidential candidates by how well their platform would fix our democracy and expand the opportunity to everybody. Andrew Yang is the only candidate in the top 10. He's the only person running with an A+ rating from Equal Citizens. And the reason that's the case is because he has in his reform not just things that everybody else has, like ending partisan gerrymandering and reforming our electoral college, but he has things like ranked choice voting. He has something called democracy dollars, which is a form of publicly financing the election, which is to say that every American citizen gets a $100 voucher that they can spend either on a single person or on any combination of people running for public office in an election year. It's use it or lose it. But what happens is by having a publicly financed election, it washes out the lobbyist money, the corporate money by 10 to 1. Imagine everything that you've ever fought for or really stood up for in politics, but you couldn't get it done because there's a multi-million-dollar lobby standing in your way. If this country listens to the almighty dollar, but we can harness the almighty dollar to be on our side, imagine how much more people can actually get involved in the civic and political process. And that's why he's the only one. There are other people running with very good platforms on democracy. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke. They all have good ratings too. But he's the only one with an A+ because he's proposing solutions that have been proven to work around the world and will actually show results. So I'm getting close. How much time do I have?
About 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right. Perfectly timed. So let's talk about how we pay for it. I know we touched on it already, but I've heard a lot of people tell me that is the one thing that's preventing them from voting Andrew Yang. Because he has the best ideas, he has the best vision, but if they can just see proof that he has a way to pay for it, then they're on board. Because if you think about it, what's the most progressive thing than lifting millions of people out of poverty and giving them cash? There's nothing more progressive than that. And so let's revisit again how we pay for it. The top line is $3 trillion. If anyone's taking notes, you're welcome to do that. You're starting at $3 trillion. You take it down by $1 trillion because of the welfare gap, overlap. I'll take this moment to sidebar and say if you're on Social Security or veterans disability, you will still get that. You don't have to choose. So if you're, so that's not part of the equation. So if you're currently on Social Security and disability, you will still receive that. So you take down the cost by $1 trillion. Now you're at $2 trillion. Then you subtract the $800 billion generated by the value-added tax. So who's keeping track? So we're at $1.2 trillion now. So you remove you're at $1.2 trillion. Then you remove another $800 billion through the projected the conservative estimate of economic growth, which is about $800 billion, and that gets you 1.8, 1.2 minus 8. I know I have it in my notes.
400 billion.
400 billion. And so he has, and then if you go to yang2020.com, he has a number of other things that that get that final stretch. So there's the carbon fee / carbon dividend. We're going to tax all these companies that are making carbon emissions an externality and making the country pay the cost. So carbon fee, raising the cap on Social Security, putting a tax on financial speculation, those produce another $100 billion. So there's $300 billion left. I've done the math, and the math works. But the math doesn't work the way that you think it does. And I'm going to stray a little bit from the standard script. Again, I'm not Andrew Yang. And most of the people whenever I'm talking about this off the cuff, like I only have like 5 minutes, I usually don't go into the breakdown this deeply. But I will go ahead and say in front of you honestly, because we're not afraid of the math, that there is a $300 billion shortfall. And so, having admitted that, then you're probably thinking, well, this guy has talked himself into a corner. How is he going to convince us that a $300 billion shortfall is acceptable? It's acceptable this way. We're talking about building a human-centered economy. And so when we count the cost, we have to ask ourselves, what does it cost us if we don't do this? Just this year, just with this presidency, we had President Trump who ran on balancing the budget. But just with his tax policies alone, he's increased the deficit by $500 billion. Just by reversing Trump's tax policies, that would get you your $500 billion. But if you're counting that, again, this goes back to the values of what it means to rethink and reinvent this economy. If you're counting human value and human well-being above dollars, if you put the humanity first, as our motto says, then you're not just counting the money shortfall, but you're also counting what happens to people. If Trump is elected again, what's next on the chopping block? If you've read the news, you can call it fake or you can call it not. But if Trump gets a second term, then there's credible speculation that the next thing on the chopping block is Medicaid and Social Security. Is that going to reduce the deficit? Possibly, by a lot. But what's going to be the cost? It's going to be the cost of people losing their ability to survive. It's going to be cost in people being displaced and maybe even losing their homes and their ability to survive. And so so that's an obvious case of why maybe we shouldn't vote for Trump. But why Andrew Yang over everybody else? Again, who else has a policy that can lift so many millions of people out of poverty? If you count the dollars and cents of the other candidates, it's my policy not to smash any other candidate. I don't generally say anything mean, so I'll keep it very ambiguous, but you can probably guess. One of the frontrunners has a plan that costs $50 trillion, and his plan to pay for it is a wealth tax. Does anyone know how much a wealth tax produces year over year? When you look it up online, they say $3 trillion over 10 years. That means that year by year, a wealth tax is only capable of producing $300 billion a year, assuming it works the way it's planned. And there's a reason that while over 90% of the world has a value-added tax because it's hard to weasel out of, almost every progressive country in the world that's had a wealth tax has gotten rid of it. There's no other country now that has a wealth tax. France, with Emmanuel Macron, just in the last 5 years, has gotten rid of the wealth tax in France. And so that's why the New York Times ran an article saying Andrew Yang's plan compared to the other frontrunners is the only one that's practical and it's the only one that will work. Because when you count the costs, it's lifting millions of people out of poverty. It's making sure that people have a way to survive when their jobs are automated away. It's a way to unlock new forms of work. And I should have said this example earlier. But there's three major benefits to universal basic income. It prepares this country for automation. It creates new lines of work. And it puts value on the work that currently is not valued by the market. There are I'm trying to remember the number, over 1 billion hours of caregiving time from informal caregivers every week. What does GDP measure that at? 0. Who here knows or is in a caregiver-caregiving relationship? Either you're in one or you know someone who's in one. I would imagine a lot of us know someone. Who here has ever stayed home to take care of your kids? I know the young people are probably not, because I didn't bring a whole lot of young parents. But how many people have ever volunteered with a nonprofit? How many people here have ever donated to a nonprofit? How many people have ever driven more than 10 miles to support a cause? I think everyone who drove here. So there is work to be done in this country. But the problem with focusing on the dollar, on GDP, as the measure of health is that we don't place value on the work that single mothers do every day, that caregivers do every day, that entrepreneurs who spend 5 years starting their business before they make a single dollar themselves do every day. And so what it means to put humanity first is to create an economy that looks out for how we're doing, for making sure that people can lift themselves off of the street. It's creating an economy that says that if you lose your job because it's displaced, you still matter as a person. It's an economy that says we're not going to test you to make sure you fit in our rigid bubble of what it means to deserve support. It creates an economy where you don't have 13 million people living below poverty with zero support. It's creating an economy that says that we don't care whose idea it is, because it's not left, it's not right, it's forward. It's about creating an economy where every person has a say in our civic process, everybody has a role in our democracy, and it's creating an economy that has hope for the future. So that's why we're supporting Andrew Yang for president. That's why the DFW Yang Gang exists. You can find us online at DFW4Yang on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can visit our website, DallasYangGang.com. And that's why we're here. I hope if you agree with this vision, then we need you. We need your support. We need your hands and feet to knock on doors. And we need your vote in March on Super Tuesday. Because if we don't stand for this vision now, then it'll be a very, very long time before we get this chance again. Thank you.
Please don't go away.
Oh, yeah.
because it's kind of-
Oh, yes, that's right, I forgot. Yeah, sorry. That was a really good ending point to just walk away on, so.
Yes, you thought you'd escape, you see. Well, anyway, first person, Dale.
I saw in the paper either today or yesterday that the unemployment rate was 3.5%.
Yes.
So how do you account for that?
That's a great question. So the unemployment number is reflective of the people currently looking for work and people who are still in the workforce. If you've dropped out of the workforce and stopped looking for work, that number doesn't consider you. So that's the first part. And then the second part is that a third of all jobs created now are in the gig economy. Part-time, contractors, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, people who don't get benefits, people who don't have stable income, people working multiple jobs. And so while the unemployment figure is worth applauding and having hope, it's misleading because it leaves out a large portion of the country that stopped looking for work. It's very misleading because of the type of work that we're getting. And it's also misleading because it doesn't project what's about to happen to those very same jobs. Our current workforce participation rate is, I don't have my notes in front of me, 64%, but someone's saying down, like 63. But the key thing is our workforce participation is lower than every other industrialized country. Our workforce participation is at the level of Ukraine and Venezuela. And everyone knows how Venezuela is going. And so while it's weird, it's incongruent with maybe our peers or people we see around us, it's a little easier to come to terms with when we kind of step out of our bubble and see the people in, say, the Rust Belt who are killing themselves on drug overdoses, or the people living on the street. But whenever I talk to people living on the street and tell them that the unemployment figure is misleading, they have no doubts about it. Does that answer your question?
Oh, very good.
Thank you for the question.
I had more of a comment.
Sure.
The White House is also behind in technology. That's why the White House is always getting hacked by other countries like Russia. So could you talk more about that if you can? And you're having a IT person or someone in technology in the White House as well? I thought he said that.
Yeah. So yeah, he's asking about the fact that we're lagging behind. In fact, not only is this a technology issue, this is a national security issue. Because while the White House itself does not have a very good understanding of the state of technology today, China and other world powers do. So there's two-pronged approach to that. Number one is reopening the Office of Technology and Advancement that was closed 3 decades ago. We used to have an office in the White House for that. We don't anymore. It's time to bring that back. That's his policy. And the second part of that is taking some of our current military spending and channeling that towards cybersecurity. Because in the 21st century, that's how wars are waged. It's, yes, there's like, it's important to have like planes and aircraft carriers, but when you think about how danger it is that China can take down, who remembers, okay, this is a very young person thing, but who remembers when Netflix went down for the entire East Coast 2 years ago? Okay, you guys remember when you couldn't watch movies anymore? Well, if a foreign country can take down an entire internet infrastructure on the entire eastern seaboard, what happens when China or Russia decides to get aggressive and take down something more serious, like the electric grid or our personal data? So that's a two-pronged approach that Andrew Yang is taking, is one, reopening the Office of Technology in the White House, and two, partitioning some of our military budget on cybersecurity. Next question.
First of all, thanks for coming, and I really appreciate that your candidate is thinking. He's trying, he's working through this. But I'm a conservative, and I pretty much give this, I ask this to most big government people.
Go for it.
Okay, but basically the SEC doesn't work. Social security system is a mess. We've killed a couple million people based on lies. The federal government is this horrible, tangled, bureaucratic snake. There's just, the federal government just has not shined in any way, as far as I'm concerned. And yet you want me to give more of my life over to this failed system, this failed form of our government. You really have to do better than you've done yet to convince me that the federal government can better manage our lives. I'm not saying these problems aren't real. I'm not saying that they can't be dealt with at some other level of government. But the federal government, I mean, we're just seeing how much of it, how corrupt it is.
Well, I think you're going to like...
You're saying that you're going to be different.
Actually, you're going to really like my answer. Because the last part of your answer was you're not convinced that the federal government can handle your problems better than you can. I actually agree, and the entire Yang Gang agrees, and Andrew Yang agrees that the government cannot solve your problems better than you can, because you know what you need. And that's why the Freedom Dividend is unconditional cash given to you rather than another program where the government decides what you can spend it on. And so that's why it's called the Freedom Dividend. That's why we have people, that's why one of our mantras is not left, not right, but forward. And why conservative economist Milton Friedman supported it. It's because there's a lot of libertarians and conservatives who support this. If you go online, if you're the online YouTube research type of person, you can see an interview with Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and there was a convention called LibertyCon that Andrew Yang actually spoke at. And he was actually able to get people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin to agree with him. Because from that perspective, again, it's not the government taking money and deciding what to do with it. It's saying your shareholders in the largest economy in the world. When companies like AT&T, Amazon, General Motors, when they declare a dividend and give their shareholders apportionments of the money, no one says, hey, that's bad business. Actually, they say the opposite. In fact, the more money that companies can give in a dividend, the better indication of how the company's doing. If we see ourselves as we own this country, we are the shareholders of it, and the government's money is our money, then this is us giving it back to the people and says, you know what your situation is, here's your money back, you do with it what you want. And the only part of that can be seen as government takeover is the value-added tax of 10%. But 90% of people who would benefit, 90% of all Americans will see an increase in buying power under the combination of value-added tax plus $1,000 a month. Because mathematically, you would have to spend over $120,000 in luxury goods, because the value-added tax does not apply to staple goods. So your groceries, your diapers, your day-to-day living stuff is not taxed by the value-added tax. So unless you're spending over a lot of money, then you'll see your buying power increase. And it's only fair to make companies like Amazon that are destroying hundreds of thousands of jobs and taking away that economic freedom from others. It's only fair that we ask them that if you're going to destroy our jobs, then give us the means to find another job. And that to me is economic justice. So I agree 100%. Thank you so much for your question. I agree. You know how to solve your problems better than we can, and that's why it's the government giving you your money back.
What deep pockets are financing the Yang Gang?
Can you say, so what's the question?
I said, what deep pockets are financing the Yang Gang, and what are you going to do with corporate lobbyists? Are you going to find an island for them somewhere?
That's a great question. So I can tell you exactly what funds the Yang Gang. Blood, sweat, and tears. I am not being paid. None of them are being paid. All of these stuff that we've bought through the official Yang store, or we use our own money to produce. So if you're looking at this very nice Dallas Yang Gang shirt, that was something that was purely funded and created by local volunteers here in the city. And so the Yang Gang is funded by just blood, sweat, and tears. The Yang campaign itself has not received a single dollar in super PACs or PACs. It's one of the very few candidacies that can actually say that. I can say as an insider that a lot of PACs and super PACs have tried to support the campaign monetarily, and they have been very upfront about rejecting those donations. Whether a super PAC has an independent expenditure to pay for something else, like a banner flying over the sky, uncoordinated, I can't speak to that. But in terms of money going from a company's pocket to the campaign's fund, we raised $10 million this quarter alone, purely on donations from individuals. We've had over 300,000 individuals donate to the campaign, and 90% of them are small donations. The average donation is $30. Very few people spend more than $200 on a donation. We don't do millionaire, billion-dollar fundraisers. The fundraisers that Andrew Yang hosts are fundraisers that any one of us can attend. So that's a peek into how the Yang Gang is funded, and that's how the campaign is funded.
Peter touched on the inefficiency of the federal government. One of the questions I've got is like, how is the federal government going to distribute this money? I would assume something like the IRS would distribute the money, and if that would be the case, what's to keep the IRS from saying, oh, you owe us taxes, so we're not going to give you any? That would be one thing. And then the other thing is that if you look at how the government handles things, you can generally find probably about 3 to 10 or 15 programs that purportedly do the same thing, run by different people. So you're spending like, $100,000 to do something that would take $10 to do for you or me.
Right.
And what's to keep that kind of inefficiency from corrupting this whole effort?
It's a great question. And it's related to the previous question, which is, how good is the government at dispersing this check? So the great thing is, okay, so to answer your first question, which is, how do we prevent someone from, like the IRS, from withholding your dividend? Don't quote me on this one. Go to yang2020.com and view his policy and view the FAQ. I believe it's not going to be handled by the IRS. It's going to be handled by a separate, new department. That's what I think. They definitely go on yang2020.com for that particular answer. But to the other half of your question, which is, how can we expect the government to be efficient at this at all? It's perhaps one of the most efficient things you can do, because if this were a program where it was condition tested, like most welfare programs are, there will be a huge bureaucracy created to decide, do you deserve it? Do you get it? Like, who deserves it? By just saying, if you're an American citizen, you get this, and then tying like a single bank account or a single means to a single citizen, then there's very, very little bureaucracy required. And because it's a right of citizenship, if you owe money to the IRS, then those would be two separate issues. They wouldn't be tied together. And that's why I believe it's going to be handled by a different department. That one detail, I'm not sure off the top of my head. It's the part where I regret not being Andrew Yang himself. But, but to answer your question, it's one of the most efficient things we can do because there's no bureaucracy, there's no middlemen, there's no decision making, just are you a citizen or not? If yes, how do you want to receive it? And if someone wants to, it goes beyond your question, but if someone wants to ask me how do homeless people receive it, feel free to ask that question if someone wants to ask it, because that's also a long answer. But there's solutions to that.
Go ahead.
All right, first of all, I guess I don't have such a negative view of the government. I took care of my mother for 5 years in her 90s, and Medicare was great. So,
yes.
Okay, so there's one. The other thing is, how does Andrew Yang expect to deal with Congress? I mean, what if Mitch McConnell's still there?
Oh,
so how do
I love this question.
Okay, that's my question.
So she's asking a question that what are we going to do? But how does he get this done if Mitch McConnell's still there? Well, the first answer is you guys have a say in that as voters come election day. But the second part of this is he'll get it done the same way that Alaska managed to get it done and kept it over the last 40 years. Answering a different question, I know this is not what you asked, but someone else asked me, hey, is Alaska a bad example because this year they've been debates in the Alaska Senate and House to get rid of the permanent fund? Like, since they're debating that right now, maybe you should stop talking about Alaska. I said no, because this is not the first time that they've debated it. It's just like the National Health Service in the UK. People debate getting rid of that system all the time. They've been debating getting rid of the PFD, or the permanent fund, all the time. And the reason it doesn't happen is because it's very, very hard to take away something once it's handed out. It's a lot easier to take away something if the people being taken away from are invisible, right? Like if Congress would pass a law right now that says you can't receive food stamps if you are under 4 foot tall, right? Something arbitrary like that. I say that example because there's not a lot of 4 foot people here. So most of you will probably not notice 4 foot people or short people losing their food stamps. But imagine, so coming back to your question, imagine being the House rep or the senator when the Freedom Dividend comes to vote and you realize, wait a minute, this is hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars into my community, into the pockets of the people that I represent, and it'll take those people off of the welfare programs, like into the mind of a Republican. Like, wait a minute, I can get people off of welfare, and it'll inject hundreds of millions of dollars of capital, not in just to people's pockets, but into our businesses, into our startups, into our cities and schools. Am I going to vote no to that? Because it's very easy to say no to something that doesn't apply to you. But once it applies to you, it's very hard to say no to it. And once it's in, it's just like every other program that's been on the chopping block before. It just doesn't happen. And so that's the general theory of how it gets through and how it stays there. Because once it's proposed, the benefits of it are undeniable. Like if we're thinking about, if you go to a Yang Gang meetup, I would encourage you guys to come to our coffee socials at 10 a.m. at La La Land Kind Cafe and ask the crowd, ask the group of people, how many of you guys are Republicans? And how many of you guys are conservatives or liberals or on which side of the aisle? Almost half of the people in the Yang Gang are people who never voted before or are themselves libertarian or conservative. Because they don't see this as a handout, they see this as a hand up or people getting their money back. And so when you consider that most red states tend to be the highest recipients of welfare as it is, and you're giving legislators an opportunity to give them an alternative and boost the businesses in their jurisdiction, then they'll be inclined to vote for it. Hopefully that answers your question.
It almost passed, didn't it, like in the 70s or something?
Yeah, it almost became yeah, that's the other thing is I gave the example of Milton Friedman, and Milton Friedman was a conservative economist. It almost became law under Richard Nixon, a Republican president, and it passed in the House twice with a Republican House. The people who actually stopped it at the time were Democrats who wanted it higher, and they saw it as a political score if they can say no to it because they fought for a higher dividend. But the dividend that was under Richard Nixon is extremely close to what we're proposing now. So this is not a left issue or a right issue. This is an issue that's been championed by even some conservatives and libertarians.
Yes, first off, like Peter, I'm fairly conservative, but I like this idea a lot. The thing is, I don't see humanity as being morally developed enough in the levels of people who control things
Right.
to carry this out. And the closest that I can think of anything in our near history is what Gaddafi did in Libya. He confiscated for the nation the oil industry and
Right.
paid for all of what you're talking about and much more through that. But he was a benevolent dictator. He had to take over with the military but to stop warring tribes in the country. When he stopped that, he got them all into a council to solve their problems and confiscated the oil industry and started paying for everything. Everybody got all the basics that they needed, free medical, free education, and so forth. If we are looking at about 350 million people times $12,000 a year, you're talking about 4.2 trillion per year. And I don't see where you've come up with anything close to that. Now, I think, frankly, if this kind of thing is to be done, confiscation of something like the entire petroleum industry might have to be done, but look what you're going up against.
Right.
But I think that should be done. I think all the resources under the earth belong to humanity, not to the Rockefellers and a few others. How would you solve this kind of problem?
That's a great question. I love what you said, that it belongs to humanity. I want to adjust the math really quick on what you provided. Yes, there is about 350 million total population in the United States, but this only applies to American adults 18 years and up. So that brings the total number of recipients down. There's also, and there's this unconditional universal with a couple tiny asterisks. The first asterisk is if you're in jail, you don't receive it, so the current incarcerated population, that's like, it's kind of peanuts in terms of the larger scheme, but that's kind of a deduction savings. Because again, I don't usually mention that because we're trying to get people reducing mass incarceration, not increase it. And then the other tiny asterisk is that if you do not live inside the United States, like you're an expat for a significant amount of time, then the economic theory that makes UBI work doesn't apply in your case. So expats who are out of the country for a specific amount of time would not receive the dividend. They would receive it when they start receiving when they come back. That kind of helps that person become part of the American economy. And so when you look at the realistic headline costs and you look at how much, I'm really glad you brought up oil because again, that's exactly how Alaska funds it. And studies show, you can look this up online, our data is worth more than oil now. And that's how giant mega billion-dollar corporations like Google and Facebook and Netflix, those all exist because they're making money off of the data on each and every single one of us. And so you're right, if we want to fund something like this, we need to get the money out of things that we own. And just as we own the soil underneath us, we have a right to our own data. And if our own data is making companies billions of dollars, then it only makes sense that if you're making money off of us, we have a right to some portion of that.
Could you go through the maths of the fact that for the poorest you're taking away benefits, which cost a certain amount,
Right.
then you're giving them $1,000 a month back. It really seems to me that's not really lifting that many people out of poverty. The problem really is you're making it universal, and so everyone gets it. I can understand why you're doing it. You're not means testing it, but really does it solve the problem of poverty?
That's a great question. So he's asking the question about the fact that it goes to everyone, and there's some people already receiving benefits right now. And this is actually a good counterbalance to their question, which is that the government is really inefficient at a lot of things. There's very, very few things that we're really good at government. And so by the fact that we're not means testing, it answers the efficiency question. And so now we're answering the other side of that coin. First of all, like I mentioned in my talk, there are 13 million people right now who do not have any access to any kind of welfare program or social safety net. So this idea that welfare is helping people out is, yes it does, but the extent of that's questionable. And then the second part is, the majority of people receiving benefits right now is less than $1,000. So by choosing the $1,000 over what they're currently receiving, it's a huge upgrade for a lot of people. And then the third part of that is existing welfare programs. Let's say you're already receiving $1,000 in welfare benefits or more. Even if you're already receiving those benefits, there's a social services worker who surveyed her clients asking, would you prefer $1,000 a month, clean, clear, or the benefits you're already receiving? Some of them were all receiving less than $1,000, some of them were receiving more. 30 out of 33 of her clients, over 99%, said they would prefer the $1,000 over their benefits, because not many people who are not on welfare don't realize is welfare is a very, very rocky boat to stay on. The average time it takes from when you apply to when you actually start receiving anything is 2 years. Once you're on, the average time that you stay on or that your benefits stay the same is 6 months. And how to stay on it requires regular checkups, regular check-ins, making sure you stay at a certain level of poverty, because once your income goes up by getting another job, then you're liable to lose your benefits. So millions of Americans would rather choose the stability of $1,000 rather than the month-by-month questioning of whether they'll receive their benefits because their kid was sick, so they missed their appointment with their social worker, or they got a new job. Or if they're on disability and they posted on Facebook that they went on vacation. If their disability hinges on their inability to perform physical work, and then their social worker finds out that they're capable of doing something physical, they could lose their benefits. And so the math works out that A, there's already 13 million people not receiving anything. B, there's a lot of welfare recipients who are not receiving enough. And C, even if you're receiving something, it's an extremely rocky boat. And so that's why the Freedom Dividend, that people can opt in and forego those other welfare programs, is far superior, because it's not just money, it's security and economic freedom. You can choose to live a better life and make smarter decisions if you know what your income is going to be month after month after year after year.
You mentioned Netflix and a cyber attack. But what about a CME or an EMP attack on the grid? There are studies that say that in 3 years after a major grid down, 90% of everybody would be dead. And I think there have been estimates done that to harden the grid would take between about $15 billion and at most $30 billion to get that done. What is the Yang campaign's position on hardening the grid?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you brought it up. You go to yang2020.com, go to policies. No, but seriously, go to yang2020.com and look at what he's going to do, there's a couple issues here. Number one, current military spending, like I alluded to earlier, we need the state of warfare in the 21st century is not in physical geographic locations. It's over the internet, it's cyber warfare. So that's why he's one of the few candidates who says we're going to take a chunk of that military budget and put it into making sure we're safe on the grid. The second part is opening again the Office of Technology, and I remember the acronym was like OTA. I'm probably going to review this recording later and then like, oh, it was called something else. But as Adrian mentioned, that it's part of his policy to actually reopen that department in the White House for the Office of Technology. And then the third part is that to answer the question of cybersecurity and our grid, is that there's another thing he wants to create is a new department called the Office of Builders and Destroyers, which is that this is really more a larger infrastructure question, which is that if anyone knows, both Republicans and Democrats love to harp on how awful our bridges, our roads, and our infrastructure is. And so part of what his policy is, again, to reallocate the current spending on military to fund these infrastructure projects around the country. And so that and when we talk about infrastructure, that's not just roads and buildings, but that's also our electric infrastructure. So upgrading our grid to clean energy, which is again also a tangent on climate change. Upgrading our infrastructure to have a better grid, as well as addressing the cybersecurity aspect of it, is a multi-pronged approach to making sure we don't all die because our AC in Texas is gone.
Any more questions? If not, everyone who wants to speak can go up, and you have 5 minutes. So, if you'd like to speak. So.
Hi, I'm Kennedy. I'm a finance major at UT Dallas. I'm part of the Yang Gang. I run the university at Texas Dallas Yang Gang. We have several great people that are awesome there. There was a lot of questions on how to pay for it, and so I, the finance major, have taken the burden upon myself to quickly do like 6 calculations at the table and kind of like break it down, if that's all right, in a much better way. Right, so it's about 300 million adults in the US that would be eligible for it. It's actually a little less, but we'll go with 300 million because it's a nice round number. If you multiply that by $12,000, you're looking at about $3.6 trillion a year for the universal basic income. Got it with me? I wish I had a whiteboard that I could draw this out on. So actually, welfare and spending on social programs like that, with the added expense of healthcare, we're currently spending $1.5 trillion. So you've already cut it down to $2.1 trillion just by things like, if you're getting $1,000 in food stamps, you're now just getting that $1,000. So there's a lot of rollover between those two things. Economists actually have said that placing $1 in the hands of a single mother generates $7 of economic growth. So that economic growth in itself will get us about $800 billion there. So that is about 1.8 trillion, I think, if my major is giving me anything right about that. And then other economic growth through things like having automated trucks that cut down on like the inefficiency. There's also a loophole that keeps companies from spending $50 billion in taxes that will be closed under Andrew Yang's administration. Sorry, I had a whole graphic up and then my phone decided to close it at the worst time. And then the VAT tax. So the VAT tax is the big one that will fund the UBI at $800 billion. That is on luxury goods, and it's mostly paid for. So like if Amazon is importing phone cases from China, they're paying a 10% tax on all of those phone cases that they're importing. So yeah, you're paying 10%, but what's 10% on, like a $1 phone case? 10 cents. But Amazon, on the other hand, if they're importing millions and millions of those, they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars. And so many companies are doing this that the money keeps going up to $800 billion. And so, like you said, I think there is a $300 billion gap there. But if the federal government can bail out the banks in 2009, I'm pretty sure they can find $300 billion to care for its citizens. That was my spiel.
Okay, could you, the question I asked was, what is the net benefit to, say, the poorest decile of the population then?
Right, so part of that is what Hexel was talking about, that if we are measuring things just off of economic growth, we have the economic growth number at 800 billion, and that's what we estimated at. But again, if you go back to what are the single mothers getting worth their time, what are caregivers getting worth their time, what are these people that don't have jobs getting worth their time, then the value of what we're putting into.
Well, yeah, but look, that's all very well, but it's, for the very poorest, it's dollars and cents. Buying groceries, buying diapers, buying, paying the rent.
So is this a question about
The amount,
Well,
like it's $12,000.
No, it's actually a question of what extra dollars will the poorest actually get?
Oh, okay. I could take it on the way
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah,
Thank
because,
you.
Yeah.
Because that's the fundamental question. Because these are the people in today's economy that are really, really hurting. Actually.
Right. Yeah, and thank you, Kennedy, for bringing the math. So I'll address her comment and then just yours.
Sure.
So she actually brought a good point, which is that there's actually multiple models that break down the math. I would say when I was doing my research, half of the models showed it breaking even or even being surplus. For this talk, because I wanted to alleviate anyone, especially the more like fiscally conservative minded, that this still works and is valuable, I took one of the more, I want to say, fiscally conservative estimates. So, for example, if you go to freedom-dividend.com, those are Yang Gang supporters. They support Andrew Yang, and they're the ones who produced the model that I based my presentation on, and they're the ones that had the $300 billion shortfall. And again, so what I wanted presented was when you take in not just the actual monetary cost, but our human cost as well as the cost of any other solution, like a $55 trillion plan by another candidate that's based on a wealth tax that might not work, then you see that the math works out tremendously because we can actually pay for the large majority of this. And we can even get, if you take the fiscal conservative estimate, then you get that $300 billion just by rolling back what Trump did. But to Kennedy's point, if you go to a different model, a lot of them show it breaking even or even, going over. So to your question, the poorest of the poor. So one thing that we have here in Dallas, we have multiple groups. We have Dallas Yang Gang, Denton Yang Gang. We also have a homeless for Yang. We have the homeless Yang Gang. We meet every week and I get to get their feedback. And for the 6 times that I've met with them, every single one of them sees immense value in getting $1,000 a month. It's very hard to tell someone who has nothing that $1,000 is nothing either, right? And so to your point about the poorest of the poor, if you're truly receiving nothing, then the buying power that $1,000 a month gives you is infinite. If you're receiving something, then if it's $1,000 closes the gap, like if you're receiving $300 in SNAP, in food stamps, there are people who receive food stamps now that sell their food stamps. Because there's a lot of people in the margins who says, okay, great, I've worked really hard to qualify for food stamps, but my pressing issue is not food stamps, it's medicine or it's clothes. I could avoid getting sick if I just had a good jacket. So there's literally people selling their food stamps as it is now. And so it'll close the gap for the people, it'll give something to people who have nothing, the poorest of the poor. It'll give something to the people who don't get enough. And for the people who, again, a small minority of people who receive exactly 1,000 or more than 1,000, it gives them something even more valuable, stability. And for a lot of people, they can plan their lives around stability. It's very, very hard to make moves if you don't know if you're going to get that next welfare check. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah, but I have my reservations. But I have 5 minutes, so
Yeah.
Why don't you get up there?
Yeah, well, maybe we could, because you got your, if you want to make a 5 minute, then we can.
Well, no, actually, well, everyone has 5 minutes,
Yeah.
actually. Who wants to speak?
Yeah.
I just
That's
wanna
right,
ask-
right. So,
Do you have a question, or do you want to
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
No, no,
yeah.
you can't.
I'm just big-
The questions are over, actually.
A question.
These are a little like,
there.
I didn't know it's normal to ask
So,
the presenters
anyway,
questions.
Questions are over, so I'm sorry, but you know, let me, so my turn, okay. So today I can, yes, I think, I'm not really, I think this may be a good idea, but honestly, I think it somewhat misses the point. Yes, I think it's a palliative, actually, but the real problem is we are losing jobs, real jobs. And what I hear a lot is that people get their degree and they can't find jobs. And that's a real problem. So the thing is, I said last week, we need a jobs, we don't need to have a job center. We need a center that actually is in the business of helping, enabling job creation and financing it. And just taking the money from the criminals in Wall Street, which is a circular casino where the money stays and it goes round and round, ripping everyone off while enriching them. And in fact, in investing in such things as jobs training, business creation, and so on, and innovation too, because actually, we are definitely displacing people through technology, but really, technology is the only way America can compete with the rest of the world, because we do need people with advanced education putting their and actually displacing other people. So, but we know that. But we need people. We need more people doing Alzheimer's research, cancer research, major problems with poverty, major problems with drug addiction. We have tons of problems to solve. So this, I think, I would. This is fine. I'm not saying it's, but I think it's to me, it distracts from the major problems I see America having, actually. So yeah, but don't make it the focal point. I mean, Trump was elected because he said, look, I'm going to bring jobs back. I feel your pain and I understand you. Now, the Democrats didn't do that. That's why they lost, okay? They've completely missed the boat. So anyway, I'd hate for him to base his whole campaign on this one issue. See, it's good, but it isn't sufficient by a long shot. That's my point. Next 5 minutes, please. Next person. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Well, it's very encouraging to see the younger generation getting involved in. You're welcome into the younger generation too.
Young at heart.
Getting involved in this political scramble of a mess that we have. But I think it's somewhat like the archetypal innocent walking into a very difficult plot. And I think you're going to get an education. Whether you're going to end up with any of the things after everything's said and done that your ideals, what you're hoping for, look what's been done to Trump. You can talk all day about who he is or whether he deserves it or not, but I mean it's been an assault like nothing we've ever seen. And any other person coming up these days, especially if you're not going to go with business as usual. If you go in there hoping to make a sea change, the establishment, those career politicians they're going to have you for lunch. So I don't know if there's really any particular advice. I don't know whether I'd say watch your back or maybe have a very strong corkboard in your back to catch all the daggers being thrown at your back. I guess in other matters, whether you are pro-government or pro-rugged individualism, we still have a challenge in the area of regulation. Earlier today, I was going over looking at some do-it-yourself geodesic dome projects. And literally, with PVC pipe and some wire ties, you can put together a pretty nice geodesic dome in like 15, 20 minutes. And this particular company was even advising that you got to be using this for the homeless, because it's pennies on the dollar for any other kind of construction, and that gives them some kind of shelter. In Dallas, actually, I don't know if you know it, but we have a very large homeless population. We have homeless communities scattered throughout along the Trinity River, a lot of the trails, biking trails, nature trails, and it's really rather robust. If you ever get to a Sierra Club meeting, they've given some lectures there on the different homeless camps. I mean, you can do a bird's eye view of the city, and there's like 100 or more. So it's really rather interesting. So I don't know what particular things the Yang gang wants to pick out to solve, but the business as usual. How politics works is you have a politician's office, and somebody comes in with a bushel load of cash, they dump it on the politician's desk, and then they say, I think you ought to, help us out with this. And the politician says, I think that's a good idea. And there you have politics right there. That's how it works.
Okay. Now,
Well, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very interesting. I think we've touched a little on this. The problem that we have with government is that there is this opioid in human consciousness called greed and lust for power. And it seems to control everything, to give us every war we have. There's nothing more profitable to industry than war and reparations after war. That's why we have them all the time. That's why this country has 1,000+ military bases all over the world, which we have no business having. Russia has 2, and they're very close to Russia. So we vilify Russia for being so militaristic. I think we need to look in the mirror in that respect. But the problem is, I see that, now I think this idea that you have is more advanced than most. But you cannot be naive into thinking that you can form a socialist form of government and turn the power over to them, because the people who get into those upper echelons are greedy and lusting for power, and they will say all the sweet things you want to hear until you, like John said, you dump that barrel of cash on their desk, and then you're fodder, get out of the way. Somehow we need to realize, and I think the younger generation needs to go back into the origins of this country and study that Constitution, because our founding fathers were so advanced it was incredible. They knew that the banking system was the most dangerous thing we had, and that's why Thomas Jefferson said, if we ever let a private bank get control of our money through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. And look at all the millions of people who've been kicked out of their homes. Inflation, deflation, this and that and the other. This is the banking system. It's the most greedy organization on the earth. And the Constitution has never been properly amended to allow the Federal Reserve to be anything but a criminal activity. And the Constitution mandates that the dollar is asset-backed, is defined as an ounce of silver. Right. In any event, Gaddafi did that, and his reign in the country, he set up a gold-backed dinar system and was trying to get the African Union countries behind him on that, which would have eliminated all of this inflation and the ups and downs and so forth. I think that is the major reason that he got taken over. The CIA funded Al-Qaeda, gave them weapons, and 250,000 of them came in and killed 2 million of their people, or 600,000 and 2 million left the country. Every black man in that country was immediately beheaded by these Al-Qaeda. Under Gaddafi, everyone, including women and blacks, were equal. Women could own their own businesses, could drive their own cars. I mean, they were equal with the men under Gaddafi. And our press has vilified him so that most people think he was a bad guy. And he was probably one of the most enlightened leaders in our modern times. And we need to go back and look into what he really was up to. He stopped a warring country, 2 warring tribes, that was the poorest country in Africa because of that, brought them together in a council, and then stepped back to be an advisor so that the council, their Congress, would run things. Confiscated the oil industry, turned 49% of the money into all the needs of the government, including free education anywhere in the world people needed to go, and free medical treatment, sending anybody anywhere in the world they needed a specialist and a loved one along with them. I mean, it just went on and on and on. It's many of the things you're thinking of here. We need to also realize that our press has been co-opted. You cannot believe most of what is in the press because it's run by the oligarchs who want the New World Order, which is dictatorship. And the idea, as espoused, of socialism just sounds so nice and loving. But look at the history of every country that's gone socialistic. Almost all of them have turned from socialism to communism to dictatorship to terrible persecutions of people. And look at Russia, look at China, and on and on and on. If we can monitor our government like the Constitution mandates that we have to do, which we are not doing. That's why all these things are out of control. If we would go back to the fundamental ideas of that Constitution and mandate that our Congress and our leaders follow what the people want, then we might move along in this kind of a direction. And then I want to violate the rules here once. I have a question for you.
Oh, sure. Well, it's great because then I got to respond.
Okay. I think you might be able to answer it. I am very curious at the origin of your 2 names. Now, Colorado might come from American Indians or the state of Colorado
It's
itself.
a really good story.
Where in the world does Hexel come from? I can't identify that anywhere in the world. You gonna answer?
Oh, yeah. Can I?
Yeah. He can have a minute of my time.
Because I'm going to answer his question, but I'm also going to address one of the things he said. So 2 cheaters in a row. 2 wrongs make a right. So my name's Hexel Colorado. Hexel because, I kid you not, this might have to do, this math was born in me, I suppose. I'm the 6th member of my family, because it's mom, dad, 3 brothers, and then me. And so my dad had a stroke of genius and said, hey, family member number 6, Hexel sounds like a good name for you. So there's no country of origin for it. If you Google it, it'll be all over Europe. I guess it has some kind of traits of a European language name. Colorado because, so I'm Filipino, and Colorado is a Spanish word. And my family got the Colorado name because the same way the state did, which was in the 16th century when the Philippines was a Spanish territory. There was a census and everybody had to register a family name. And the very first Colorado, who wasn't named Colorado yet, but he was a farmer, his skin was exceptionally red of countenance. And so when he went into the census office and asked to be registered, he didn't have a family name in mind. And so the Spanish census worker said, "You're a very Colorado man, Mr. Colorado." And he liked it so much he stuck. We have an oral legend for how we got our name. So that's why I'm Hexel Colorado. Now, to answer your question, you said a lot of good things about, you said a lot of things I agree with. There's one misconception. This is not socialism. In fact, we have to get past this capitalism-socialism dichotomy, because if you enjoy having a business, then you are pro-capitalism. But if you enjoy having firefighters, policemen, then you have a socialist streak. Now, the definition of socialism, as you may know, is when the government controls the means of production. A freedom dividend of universal basic income is not that. Because rather than controlling the means, rather than being a federal jobs guarantee that certain candidates are offering, federal jobs guarantee is the socialist idea because it's literally the government controlling that output. And again, I'm not going to name names because that's not how I roll, but you can kind of guess who's espousing that idea. This is not socialism. This is giving you the money to operate the way that you want. If you want to take that money and start a business, that's up to you. If you want to take that money and do something else, the government has no say in what you do with your money. And that's why this isn't a socialist idea. That's why when you go to his website, his pillar is not socialism or capitalism, it's human-centered capitalism. This is capitalism where income doesn't start at zero. Because if we want to create a system where capital is constantly flowing, then we need to inject capital into that system so that people can participate. This is no different from when the government printed $4 trillion and gave it to the banks to stimulate the economy. We're talking about something very similar, but instead of to the banks, it's to the people. And we create an economy where the money flows and people can do what they want with their own capital. This is not socialism. This is not a takeover over production. This is giving the power of production to the people.
I'd like to say that I'm encouraged by the young people involved here. You obviously believe in what you're doing, and at this point, you're convinced that your ideas are going to work. I would suggest that you learn to be brutally honest with yourself, because you're going to learn things as you try to implement things. There's nothing worse than someone who has an idea, tries it, implements it, it doesn't work, and the fact that it doesn't work doesn't change their mind, they just keep pushing it harder. If you're going to be successful, I'm encouraged that you're involved and you believe in what you're doing, and that's a good thing. So throw your energy into it, do all you can to get your ideas implemented, but be realistic. When you start trying to implement things and you have to deal with the realities of actually making something work, you're going to learn things that are going to be very uncomfortable and difficult, and you're going to learn things about people. There's just all kinds of things, like John said, somebody comes into the politician's office and throws money on his desk and says, I think you ought to do this. Well, that's one side of it. The other side is, if you don't do what we want, some bad things are going to happen to people you care about. And those things happen. So be idealistic, believe in what you're doing, work at it, do what you can to make what you believe in happen, but be brutally honest with yourself when you run into things as you try to implement things and find out how things actually work, because you're going to learn some very interesting and probably difficult lessons in doing that.
Anybody else wants their 5 minutes? Please, yes.
So really quickly, do I have to go up there?
Yes, you do.
That way you'll be on camera.
You do.
Yeah, representing some of the older demographics. Just
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to push back on a couple of ideas. I don't disagree. I mean, there's a lot of naivete. There's a lot of good feeling. There's a lot of human issues that we really need to look at and that always come in the middle of all the good works that people are trying to do. But I would like to say a couple of things. I mean, there's a lot of older people and people that we would recognize originally, that have also come to the same conclusion. I mean, we have to recognize that this is not just an idea of good things happening. This is a paradigm shift. I mean, it's it's not just Milton Friedman, it's Hayek, it's Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher's economists that came to this conclusion that this is the only way to address issues of, it's not just automation, it's artificial intelligence. It's not just, putting this piece into that thing. It's actually learning systems. Anything that's rule-based is at risk. We cannot create jobs that'll compete with something that does something perfect every time. And it can learn, and it can always do the things at the best, best in breed. It sees that, it encodes it, and it remembers it, and it keeps doing it. And every time somebody does something better, whether it's an intricate surgery, or whether it's amazing code, it remembers it, and it'll implement it. We have to think in different terms. We cannot educate people fast enough, and that's not me saying that, that's Hayek. That's a hardcore conservative economist. Milton Friedman, we keep looking backwards for the answers we had for last year. We need to look forward for the answers that are really crashing down on us. And we can't afford to have some very special people kind of sit there and stick a widget in the works, because they're going to get affected too. I'm sure most of these people that are so harsh also have kids. We need to look at environmental issues. We need to look at economic issues. And I just like to put it in a couple of words. Andrew Yang is not some schmo out of Good Feeling University or something like that. He went to Phillips Exeter. He did get accepted to Stanford. He chose Brown. He was a Columbia lawyer, and he is a capitalist. He is a venture capitalist. He is not a socialist. This is capitalism that doesn't begin at zero. I understand there's a lot of political work to do, and there's a lot of bad actors out there, but we can't afford to really wait for the bad actors to make their move. They've got kids too. We've got to appeal to people's better angels, and not. Right now we're appealing to people's racism or identity politics or some crazy stuff. It's going to affect, and it's not just what we do as Americans. This is the same issue that's confronting Chinese. This is the same issue confronting, Asia. It's confronting South America. We're all in this together. This paradigm shift it's really changing the role of labor in the entire economy equation. We can't just look at educating people better. Just as an aside, that was exactly what Hillary Clinton was proposing. Nobody listened to it. The other guy was shooting like sugar and candy and stuff, and they just went straight for that. But the Democrats have been proposing retraining and new job creation and change. That's an aside. We can choose to hear what we want to hear, but that's actually on the record. But I just want to say we have to get out of our comfort zone in our historical perspective and just understand that it's not just young, idealistic people who have to make a living when everybody else is left. We have to look at the future, because that's really coming right now. Machines that can learn, they're going to pick up new things faster than even our smartest people. Maybe not the super smartest, but Kasparov lost to a computer. Who thought that would happen? I would just push back on those areas, because we're looking at different things as an old guy, but as a younger guy, you're looking at much different things. But the whole paradigm has changed. And that's Hayek saying he's not a young kid. He was Ronald Reagan's economist. He's hardcore conservative. He's small government. Milton Friedman's a monetarist. Therefore, reducing and going back to gold standards or really tightening the credit. This is a very different situation. I would encourage everybody to go back and look at it. It's not Andrew Yang who just invented it out of his back pocket. These are serious economists that are looking at least a little bit ahead. And I suggest that we look at that too. And that's not a bad world. Every rich person in the world has people taking care of a lot of stuff for them. They don't necessarily work every day because they don't worry about where their food is coming from. And I think all the studies that we've seen, if you control for financial insecurity, everything goes up. Hexel can talk to you about how it affects your IQ. How it affects relationships, your marriage, your life, your dreams, the things you do in the morning, financial security is such a huge issue in our society. And he's the only guy looking at it. Everybody else is going to give you a job or give you $15 an hour, and I love those guys. But that doesn't help you if you don't have a job. and you're never going to have one. I mean, just how smart do we have to be to compete with something that's super smart? We have to rethink our paradigm. And that's not something that we might see in 5 years, but we might see in 6. Because stuff like that goes really fast. Ask anybody that's in any kind of tech industry. And movable arms, you think your plumber will always have a job. Just look at this mechanical stuff we have. It can do that. It'll always do the best thing that we have learned to date. It'll always do it exactly the same way. It'll always learn. I mean, we're gonna train people to compete against that? That's a tall order. I mean, we're really looking at a sea change. And whether people are gonna get tricky about it or, political about it, and I hang out with a lot of political people. I mean, just because, that's where we gotta be as a country now, because we really gotta figure out some real issues. Real issues. The globalization, the environment, the whole change in our economy. Let's start coming together and figuring out solutions before we have real problems. It's not just America. We're competing with everybody in the world. If we don't do it, you really think those other guys are not going to do it? They're already doing it. They got fantastic robots out there in AI and stuff like that. They don't have to start at zero. Okay.
Very good. Is there anyone else who wants 5 minutes? Okay, Hexel, you're on to wrap up and close the meeting.
All right. Now I've got a bone to pick with every one of you. No, well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, College Complex, for having me. Thank you, John, and thank you. I know he's not here, but if you're watching this, Tom, thank you so much for bringing me on. I want to say you've been a very wonderful group. I'm astounded that you guys have kept this going for over 400 meetings. That is very impressive. That's very inspiring. I hope you guys continue this year after year, and I hope that this continues to bring in new people to carry that torch that you guys have started. I will address a few things. So socialism has been touched on pretty well. In case there's anyone who's like, I feel like we've badgered a lot on socialism today. So this is, hands down, this is a human-centered capitalism. It's about capital. And it's not about government controlling anything. It's about giving you, the people, your own resource to make your own decisions. We're not controlling your means, we're not controlling your production. One of the things that John brought up, which is really important, which is that one of the foundational things is giving people work and giving people jobs, right? And so it's not an exaggeration. Again, this is not my own number when I say that economists predict that a Freedom Dividend will create over 2 million jobs. Go to the website, yang2020.com, it says 4 million jobs. And the reason that happens, and the reason we can say that with such confidence, is that's exactly what happened in Manitoba, when they had the Universal Basic Income project there. Because what happens when you provide everyone unconditionally, universally, a basic income? What happened in Manitoba is that you fed the supply side, so people who wanted to start a business suddenly had capital to do it. You literally had people buying sewing machines, buying tailoring machines, buying cooking equipment. But not only do you feed the supply side, but you also feed the demand side, where not only do you have a business to offer, services and products to offer, you also have people who can buy the services and products that you have available. That's how capitalism works. And it's exactly what happened in Manitoba. It's exactly what happened in every other country that has tried this. Because again, this is not a new thing, as Hisham said, that we just pulled out of our back pocket. It's not something that Andrew Yang invented. In fact, the mechanism for how the Freedom Dividend works, he didn't even write that originally. He got that from a labor union leader. A labor union leader was the one who helped him guide the specific details, and he took it and he talked to economists after economists. He himself has a degree in economics and political science. And so just as it created jobs in all of these places that had that experimented with it, it's going to do the same thing here, because with $1,000 a month as a social safety net, if you want to start a bakery, if you want to start a restaurant, if you want to get into music, if you want to get into arts, if you want to start your own venture, now you have a means and a safety to do it. Entrepreneurship is at a multi-decade low. If we want more jobs, and we want jobs that won't be automated away, we need to do something about the fact that we need to give people the runway and the ability to create jobs. Because even now, before basic income, entrepreneurship is at an all-time low. If we want to bring it back, we got to give them the means and the ability to do so. And then I will actually, the second to last thing is I agree with a point that a lot of people made, which is that the government is inefficient at a lot of things, and perhaps most things. And that's why we give the people trust in the people. You know what you need. We're here on this mission because we believe in people and we believe in humanity first. And so I'm just going to end on some plugs. If you're here in the room or if you're online, go to DallasYangGang.com. You can find my contact information. I'll also be sticking around giving out my cards. You can find us on social media at DFW4Yang on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to find us in person, we meet every Saturday morning at that coffee shop in Lower Greenville at 10 a.m. We're always there. If you want to ask more questions, because I got a feeling that the questions don't end tonight. So if you want to grill someone like me, if you want to grill like anybody in the Yang Gang, you're more than welcome to show up, ask your questions, have a friendly conversation over a nice cup of coffee. This is a mission. One of the things we want to keep in mind is that this is not many people come along. He's not a career politician. He's offering real solutions based on history, based on facts, and based on data. One of the things that I tell my friends is when we're thinking about who to elect, too often we ask the question, who deserves to be president? And then we'll go on a litany of how many years they've been in public office, what kind of successful bills they've passed. And those are all good things, those are all valid things to measure. But when we talk about who we're going to support in 2020, don't just ask who deserves to be president. In fact, I would venture to say that might be the wrong question. Ask who does this country need to be president? And who has a vision that'll take us beyond that person's term? And if we can move to an economy that puts humanity first, if we can move to an economy that people don't have to live on the street if they're willing to work and they're willing to lift themselves up, then I believe that we can create a legacy that goes beyond 2020 and beyond this cycle. And I think if there's anything that's worth doing, it's that. Thank you.
Well, anyway, I think Hexel here did a fabulous job tonight. He really, I think, was tremendously energetic. He certainly was on top of his topic, and I think he interested most of us. And we wish him well, and so on. But as older gang has said, it's very nice to see the younger folk, because really, that's the future. That's the way the country needs to be. Okay, and so we're happy, and so I'm happy that this forum has allowed that to happen. Anyway, we're gonna wrap it. The restaurant is open until about 10, so you want to hang around and ask all the questions you want. Anyway, thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week. Thank you.
I'll be around. I have business cards and brochures if you want to get more information. $4.